reaction is easy. And it's, as you guys point out, it's emotion. You feel a surge of emotion and you react, right? This is where we get like lashing out or taking your day out on someone or someone doing something wrong, you blowing up at them or what the hell, why'd you do that? Versus sitting back and responding. Um, so I think that, one of the things I've noticed and where this topic came from for me is, and we're all guilty of it to some degree, but my father, he is the one I learned this from. He is someone who I've only seen my father react to something twice in my life in terms of like something negative. And he had a right to react. um, but my father is someone, even in his older years, younger years, whatever, he responds, meaning that he sits with it. Oftentimes, when you're talking to him, he listens and listens and listens. And when there's a pause where you would want him to kind of give you feedback, he will ask, are you wanting me to give you my opinion or advice? He asks prior to giving it. His response, he responds to almost everything. He diligently thinks through it before he says anything. And that's something that is practiced and comes from a place of just inner peace, right? My father, who is very much, in my opinion, a champion of CSI, is someone who approaches this concept of response in a real good way. It doesn't mean he doesn't feel emotion. And if he is feeling super emotional, he takes time out and gathers himself before he illustrates a response. So reaction is when someone does something, an accident, intentional, whatever the case may be, and we react to it, meaning that an emotion comes up, as a lot of you guys said, an emotion comes up and we then react in a negative capacity. Now, the emotion itself can come from a number of different places, right? It can come from your story. It can come from your narrative. It can come from your past. It can be trauma, right? Something that typically would be benign or not even have that big of a reaction could cause you to overreact. And because it triggers you and you may not even be aware that that trigger is occurring. Could be that your bandwidth or your fuse is this big, and that comes from different things in your life. So a lot of times when the emotion comes up, right, and we react, the problem with that is that we're causing damage to ourselves. We don't realize that we're causing damage to ourselves and to the other person. Now, if you live in that space of reaction all the time, that's your norm, which means your nerves are fried, means that your threshold for stress is greatly reduced. It means that you live on edge. It means that your fight or flight response is almost always active. It's a really bad way to live, but when you don't know any better, that's how you live, right? So if you grew up in chaos, chaos becomes familiar, it becomes comfortable to the point where you almost want things to be chaotic rather than calm and normal. And you got people who go, well, I want a normal and peaceful life. And logically they do, but subconsciously they don't know how to live in that space, right? So they're always living in kind of this space of chaos and disruption. They're constantly reacting to their environment or to people from an emotional capacity, and sometimes don't even understand why they're doing that, right? Why their reaction is so fierce and so what the hell, that they don't even really understand why that intensity exists, right? A lot of times it comes from different places. And you can do work around that to understand where it's coming from. A lot of times strong reactions come from past hurts or traumas or some sort of wound that exists from your past, right? And heal it to feel it, or feel it to heal it, which is another topic we'll cover later, relates to that. But in this instance, when that emotion comes up, that emotion feels so intense that our mind and our body wants to expel it, right? There's that buildup, and there's almost a reward or a sense of relief when we expel that emotion through words or some form of behavior or action, right? This is why people break things, right? And grab a plate and throw it and break it, and it feels good, right? It's not really that it feels good, it's that you're taking that emotional buildup and pressure and you're exuding it from yourself, right? It needs an avenue. And that's where a lot of reaction comes from, is that buildup of emotion, and we then explode it out, right? It's got to go somewhere because our nervous system can't handle it. This is when you like see people who are shaking mad, right? They're so angry, they're shaking. It's because there's that buildup, and the reaction is the response, right? So that has to go somewhere. So they're shaking to kind of physically remove that pressure from their body and from their mind. And this is where, a lot of domestic violence comes from and things like that. Not saying that, you're in danger of doing those things. I'm simply saying that a lot of that comes from reactions, right? Reactions that exist. A response is one where we feel that emotion. And that's a big confusion, is people think that with response, there's not an emotional feeling. That's not real. Like, the emotion is there and it's just as intense, can be just as intense. Obviously, with time, that will change because you'll be responding, because every time you react and you exude that, you blow out that emotion through some form of yelling or reaction, negative reaction. Your mind goes, well, that's how we handle it. That's what we're supposed to do. And we've talked about programming. Your mind then programs that in as your default. So anything similar to it has an automated response, an automated reaction. This is where you get people going, well, I'm sorry I acted that way, but they don't ever change it, right? So you get to a point where you're like, well, don't even say you're sorry, because you're just going to do it again. It's not that their sorry is not real. It's, in most cases, it's not that they aren't actually contrite, or that in their mind at the time they go, well, I'm definitely going to change that and work on it, and they mean it. Typically what we find in this situation is that it's such an automated response for them, that when that they don't really know how to deal with that, they aren't even aware that it's really an automated response. It's a reaction that they formulate over time. So when that comes up, that programming kicks in, they do it again. So unless they're actively doing something on their own to work through that automated response, they'll continue to do that over and over. Just saying, I'm sorry and I'm going to work better, even though you fully believe it and mean it, unless the program in itself is dealt with, then nothing changes. Nothing really changes, right? So this is the conflict, right? This is where people go, well, they said they're sorry, but they really aren't, and they're not, whatever the case may be. So we look at that and we go, well, I can understand why someone keeps doing the same thing over and over and saying they're sorry about it, but they haven't really done anything to actually deal with the behavior itself. So like if you want to look at the right frame here, someone would go, I'm really sorry I did that. I'm going to really endeavor not to do that. And also, I'm going to really try to figure out why I keep doing that. And I'm going to do that by meeting with someone, or doing some therapy, or doing some self-reflection and talking to you about it, whatever the case may be. Because in that moment when they're saying sorry, they actually mean it, right? They do. Most people mean that sorry and mean that they're not going to do it again. Like someone said, the response comes after the reaction. But unless there's a follow-up to that, where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this, then nothing really changes. And this is in relation to the reaction. So like with red light guy, what we want is to stop the reaction. And the biggest thing I point to for people is calling a timeout, going, I need a few minutes, and removing yourself from the environment. Like, I need a few minutes. I need to kind of step outside and kind of gather myself, and then continue the conversation. but that doesn't happen. Your emotions come up and they well up so significantly. And this is where emotional intelligence comes in. So, with emotional intelligence, from a psychological standpoint, emotional intelligence is understanding our emotions and why they exist. But more than that, emotional intelligence is understanding that they're emotions and they don't need to elicit a response or a reaction, rather, right? So I can feel some kind of way, but it doesn't mean that I need to react to it. Emotional intelligence, under that understanding that emotions are just emotions. They don't require us to do anything. Even if we feel extremely compelled to do so, they're simply emotions, right? So emotional intelligence, two parts. One, understanding your emotions and what they mean, but also understanding that they are just emotions. So red light guys, the idea that you step in there and you go, whoa, wait a minute. I see what's about to happen. I'm about to react to this person or react to this situation. And instead, I'm going to stop myself. Maybe I need to call a timeout. Maybe I need to get out of this environment for a minute or whatever. And I'll respond when I'm in a better state of mind. Now, with response, what we're doing is response is something that comes from self reflection, right? Now, I'm not saying you can't go to someone and get advice or guidance on something, then you respond based on that. I encourage it, right? I absolutely encourage it. But response is something where we have sat with the emotion, we've processed the emotion, we've allowed the emotion to kind of come and flow out, and then we're going to respond in a healthy manner. And that response is what not only keeps relationships and situations in a good standing, it helps build and grow them, right? So if I make you angry about something, you can go, well, that really makes me angry. I need a few minutes. We'll talk about it later, whatever the case may be. And then the response is, hey, I need to let you know some of what I was feeling in that space and also what I think is a better approach or whatever. But response doesn't mean that we ignore the emotion. It doesn't mean we don't share it with the person. Those emotions can absolutely be valid. What you're feeling. We're not here to invalidate that. It's just with the response is something that comes from a very healthy place. Doesn't mean there's not emotion there. There can be. It's just you're going to approach it in a way that is going to build the relationship or build the situation, not tear it down, right? And I think one of the other things we have to pay attention to is this idea, well, they did this, so it's their fault. So whatever reaction occurs is on them. No, we're still responsible for how we respond to things, how we react to them. What our behavior is up to us. That person is absolutely responsible for the emotions or difficulties that they have caused, but how we approach that in reaction and response is on us, right? That's my responsibility, if that makes sense. Like if someone makes me angry and I shoot them, like someone's yelling at me and makes me angry and I shoot them, right? I'm going to go to jail for that, right? It's not going to be a situation where I get to go to court and I go, well, they were saying some really terrible things to me, and they're going to go, well, in that case, you don't need to worry about it. You were allowed to shoot them, right? That's not real, right? And you're exactly right. No one makes you angry. You have an emotional response to what someone's doing, right? So you can say, I'm very angry that makes me feel angry or whatever the case may be. But the ability to become angry or not angry is up to us. We actually have a choice in that matter. The disruption of our peace is really determined. Like, I'm either going to allow this person to affect me and disrupt my peace, or I'm not, right? But at the end of the day, the behavior, right? This person who's yelling at me or saying terrible things to me is making me feel some kind of way, and they're responsible for that, right? But if I pull out a gun and I shoot them because of it, right? That's my behavior. I'm responsible. That's a reaction. My response would be, well, I'm just going to walk away from this person and not engage them in a capacity where they could say those things or act that way. Um, a response, more than anything, is not about the other person. The response is about us, right? So don't get me wrong about this. This is like forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't, it's not really about the other person. It's really more us, right? So like people are like, well, I need closure. Well, they never asked my forgiveness. Well, you can still forgive them. It doesn't have to involve them, right? The idea that forgiveness is this kind of two-way, it has to include two people, is not real. um, that's a big misconception. But with response, our response sometimes means that we just don't engage that person. We aren't going to be in that space with them, or our response is not to allow them to disrupt our peace, not allow them to influence us in that way. But that's a choice that we make. Again, going back, right? You always have a choice as to whether you're going to react or you're going to respond. So I tell guys, like, you've got to pay attention to this and practice it. And when you realize that you've reacted, don't just go, oh man, I reacted to that and I need to do better. No, instead, what we go is, oh, I reacted to that. Why did I do that? What can I do differently next time so I respond? What's going on with me? Why did I react that way? Right. So, really kind of investigating it and understanding what's going on when that happens versus just going, man, I shouldn't have done that. And then just kind of moving on with your day, which doesn't really serve us and it doesn't serve where we're trying to be. So, reaction versus response. We as men want to endeavor to respond to our person, to our family, to our friendships, whatever the case may be, even just the people, to the cashier that has an attitude in the checkout line. We don't want to react to that. Like they're being rude and short and disrespectful. We could, our temptation is to be that way too, right? So I took back some stuff today at Kohl's, or dropped it off at Kohl's. They're Amazon items. So I went, you can return Amazon items at Kohl's. So I went there and dropped it off. And they always give you this coupon, right? And it's got your confirmation on it, and it's like 15% off anything in the store, right? It actually says that on there. And every time I've tried to use one, they tell me, well, that item doesn't qualify. And I'm convinced that none of the items in the store qualify. But today I was like, well, let me try. Again, I go up and they go, yeah, that doesn't qualify. And I was like, well, what does qualify? And they're like, well, some stuff I couldn't really tell you. Right. And then, they started getting an attitude with me. And I was like, well, these coupons don't ever really seem to work, but I'm going to get this anyway. And it's fine. And, so we can choose. Like, I felt that desire to get not angry, but like irritated and go, you guys give these coupons out, you're printing these out, which obviously costs Kohl's money. And yet I've never, in all the times I've returned stuff and tried to use this, there's nothing ever qualifies. It's like some obscure item in the back of the store that no one wants, that the 15% qualifies for, which is crazy. But I could feel myself wanting to get irritated at that. But what we want to do in those moments is respond differently. And we can affect a lot of people's lives, but also mainly our life, our own peace, our own well being. So,